Welcome back. I'm joined by Dr. Deani Van Pelt, head of Edvance, discussing education reform, not just in your province, but also across Canada and what that looks like. Welcome again, Dr. Van Pelt. Thanks again for joining me. Sometimes I find it's helpful to look at how other jurisdictions in the world have handled the topic of education, how they deliver it. Is it working? What works? What doesn't? Maybe you could share some of the examples that you've come across in your research.
The vast majority of democratic countries across the world have a system of education that's called education pluralism. And what that means is that there is a diversity of providers of education, but they're funded and regulated by the state. So take a look at a country. This is the most extreme example, the Netherlands. They have 36 forms or approaches to education.
Wow.
Secular, Christian, Protestant Christian, Catholic, Muslim, Montessori, the list goes on. 36 different systems that are funded, regulated, and some offered by the state, but not all are offered by the state. And that's what pluralism is. There is a plurality of providers. So other countries like Australia, the UK, they also have government-funded systems of education or that are part of the overall public education system that are not necessarily delivered by the state. So coming back to Ontario, for example, we have 4 publicly funded systems that are regulated, but also delivered by the state. And we do not have any systems that are funded that are delivered by alternative providers.
So if I understand you correctly, if I'm a parent in the UK and I see a school down the road, pretty much 9 times out of 10, that school is state funded, even though it may have a completely different modality of education, if you will?
Exactly. There are very, very few schools in the UK that are funded purely on private dollars or on tuition. And so in Ontario or other the 4 Atlantic provinces, we find that one must attend a government-funded, regulated, and delivered system, government-run system of schooling. That's it. Now, you might be able, as I said, in Ontario, to choose from among that. But if you want to make a choice to attend a school that is community designed or come together under a not-for-profit, you are totally on the hook for all of the funding of it. So it's this odd sense that we have public schools and independent schools, and it's almost as though we've had to pit them up against one another. And if we would look at the other jurisdiction, we'd see that public education includes all of those approaches. So it's like a highway with a lot of lanes on it. And I think that's where provinces like Ontario and the Atlantic provinces can learn an awful lot from looking around the world, and certainly at the other 5 provinces I haven't mentioned.
Now, one complaint that I would anticipate would be that, well, if we start offering all sorts of other things, that would weaken the current public system. But from what I understand, you're saying, well, no, it can all be the public system. It just may be delivered by not-for-profits, and maybe you're just the funding vehicle.
Exactly. It's all public education. And that's what we see in the 4 provinces to the west of Ontario. So governments fund, not fully, but in Alberta, up to 70 or 80% of what would go to a public school, had the student chosen a public school, goes to a school that's provided and operated by a different operator. So we have these examples across Canada. And I think what a lot of people worry about is that it undermines let's call it the public school compared to public education. It would undermine the public school. But what it does is it actually strengthens public education.
Right.
And it makes these variety of alternatives available to people, whether they're people of means or not. And what it does is that the government says, we recognize that maybe we aren't the sole best way to provide education. So back to Ontario. In the last 2 years, 150 independent schools have opened up, for example.
During COVID. Since COVID started.
And since, exactly.
Wow.
So something's going on in communities across this country, and I know Ontario the best, that's where I'm located, but to see that many community and civic organizations open up schools around a diversity of pedagogical ideas shows that there's this kind of hunger for a pluralist education system.
Now, do you have, by the way, off the top of your head, and sort of put you on the spot, stats as to how many children go to regular publicly funded schools versus independent or private schools in Ontario?
Sure. And I mean, from one perspective, that's the good news. There's about 150,000 children in Ontario that attend independent schools. There'll be more or less now with COVID happening. Independent school enrollments went down to 143,000 a few years ago, but we know that they've really skyrocketed it recently. So we're going to be up over 150,000 when we get the data for this year. But there are 2 million students attending public schools.